Hey friends, Rob Phoenix, Power Guy here. Hope you're all doing well. Um, Today I want to talk about a subject that I really love talking about and reading about, learning about and discussing, and that is the English cunning craft, the cunning men and women from like European cunning craft. Very interesting subject, and it's the reason why it's so interesting is because they are the ancestors of powwow and braucherei. Um, in order to get a good feel and understanding of the origins of powwowing, um, it's important to learn the story of the cunning men and women of Europe. And for that, we start back in medieval times. The medieval church, the medieval Catholic Church, was pretty much the go-to for um, everything. The church was in charge. The church was, universities were all governed by the church and such. And people were going to their clergy for cures to diseases, revenge against their enemies, charms and cures for like growing, their crops and such. And the church was providing these things. The medieval clergy was very much into magic. I mean, that's where all those, we talk about the grimoire traditions, they all come out of that medieval Catholicism. All those magical grimoires come out of those days and those studies. Even in the 14, probably by the 14 to 1500s, the religious institutions started kind of cracking down on their students doing this. And there's even one church in Spain, it's either Italy or Spain, I forget, that had to post a notice on the wall like uh, the clergy is not to take part in necromantic ceremonies anymore. But they were doing this, and those, like I said, those grimoires that we are familiar with now, if you're involved in ceremonial magic or Braucherei, you're familiar with the Judeo-Christian grimoires, and they come out of that medieval Catholic period where the clergy was also doing magic. So the crackdown, the church institutions started cracking down on that and making their clergy not do that anymore. But this stuff started kind of leaking out to the general public in Europe. And this became the people still had the needs that they always had. Like they still needed revenge against their enemies and healing and finding lost objects and blessings on their crops and animals and such. They still wanted all of that stuff, but they could no longer go to the clergy directly. So some clergy were still on the sly practicing it, but others were just like the regular folk that could access these grimoires and works on this type of magic. And in the beginning, it was initially the more educated folks, the people who could read. If you could read, you were just like so much more advantaged than if you couldn't, and more people couldn't. Um, so anyway, this magic started trickling out into the general populace, and they became known as the Pellers or the cunning folk, or whatever. They were the people doing this magic, which was all Christian based. It was based on what the medieval Catholic Church was doing. They believed very much in God, and they believed that God had given them special powers to do astrological charts for clients, make herbal remedies for clients, find lost objects, even curse their enemies. And I know people are going to scoff at that, but Christians have been doing magic for as long as there's been Christianity. We've been doing magic since day one. So if you think, well, you're a Christian, you can't do magic. Nah, well, we've been doing it since the beginning. Um, so I definitely would urge you to check out the book, The Cunning Man's Handbook by Jim Baker. Fantastic book. It covers that period from 1400s to 1900s, where the grimoires and that knowledge went from the church to the learned folks into the general populace around Europe. And so these people were doing these things for each other. Well, for folks, they were often charging for their services. Many of the cunning folk couldn't even read, but they would collect these grimoires if they had them, or even a copy of the Bible was pretty rare. And so they would have them on a shelf around or whatever, just to sort of add some kind of like ambiance, I guess. Like you'd walk in and see all these books and think, wow, they're so schooled in magic. But the reality is, a lot of those cunning folk couldn't even read them. Um, and so in that sense, it was pretty much an oral tradition. Uh, so there you go. So, and a lot of those folks too, because they were Christian, but they knew very little about Christianity because that was not common knowledge shared with the common folk. The common folk were just told to believe it and they believed it. And that was their worldview. So they may have known a few themes and stories from the Bible, um, and they wanted to incorporate that into the magic they were doing, and so they would come up with charms and such using these Christian biblical themes, and that's why in today we look back on these and think this is sort of nonsensical. Um, but for them, it made a lot of sense. And there was a lot of esoteric meaning that went into the words they used. They were carefully chosen symbolism and esoteric meaning. And they just played loosely on biblical themes because the people didn't actually know the Bible very well. So they did the best they could with the knowledge that they had to work with. Um, and as time passed, it became less popular for the learned people, the academics and the educated people. They started getting more like, especially in like the 1800s, they started getting less interested in this type of magic and more interested in spiritualism. And so the cunning folk were really just like regular country people and people living in towns and such that were doing this just to make a few extra pounds or shillings or whatever they have there. And so there you go. So when the immigration wave started happening to the New World, in other words, the United States, well, what would become the United States, these cunning folk were bringing their stuff with them. And here, because it was primarily within the German-speaking people, it became known as Braucherei. And eventually the English word would become powwow. But these were basically the cunning folk of America. So when John George Homan wrote his Long Lost Friend, it was largely plagiarized from the Romanes book and Egyptian Secrets, Albertus Magnus. Those two books, plus the six and seven books of Moses, were the main grimoires that were in use and popular amongst the cunning folk. And so here in Pennsylvania, there was less of a focus on the more academic sciences part of it, like astrology, um, and more a focus on the agricultural uses of it. So it just became sort of a daily medical handbook for people to use. And that was the goal. The idea was that anybody could just like pick this up and use it as needed. And you didn't make a fuss over it. You just didn't think that much about it. It was just like you lived your life, you're a regular person. And if somebody got a burn, you said this charm and blew on it 3 times, and then it was fine. It's just what people did. Then as the late 1800s, early 1900s rolled around here in Pennsylvania, some people started making it more of a professionalized service. And that's when you saw, like here in South Central Pennsylvania, powwowers set up in actual shops and had actual offices, professional offices that you would go to, and you make an appointment with them, and you'd go and you get healing done or whatever, and you would pay them for it. That was my experience with a powwow in the 1990s in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. That's in I want to say Franklin County, but that doesn't seem right. Anyway, that's South Central Pennsylvania, just above the Maryland border, and well, like a little ways away, whatever. Anyway, Shippensburg. That might be Cumberland County. Actually, I don't know. I don't know what county it's in. Anyway, so I was, and it wasn't Shippensburg, it was Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. That's right above Maryland. And that's where I went to the powwower who we had to make an appointment with. She had a waiting, like an actual waiting room and then an office. So there were several people in the waiting room, and you went in there and you did whatever it was you were there for. In my situation, I was there for a card reading. She read playing cards, and that's what inspired me to start reading playing cards. I've talked about that dozens of times or whatever, but she was more, she was my first actual power hour that I went to. But now, after learning more about the cunning folk and stuff, she was definitely more of like a cunning practitioner because it was professionalized, and she had this office and this waiting room and such with. Um, and powwowing was just kind of what people did. There were some, after the excuse me, after the Hex murder in the late 20s here in Pennsylvania, powwowing kind of went underground and people just didn't want to talk about it anymore and just kind of went secret with it. And then it had a resurgence, which I'm really grateful for. So nowadays, your local powwow functions a lot more like our cunning roots, where we train ourselves to make and use herbal remedies and use the healing charms and protection charms, and even get into a little bit of ceremonial magic work. Um, Still very Christian. That has never changed. It's never been anything different, no matter what you might hear. Uh, and so there you go. So the cunning, another here, this one, I love this book, Anathema Maranatha. This is about there's a lot about the cunning folk in here, and I have a few spots highlighted, but the rise of cunning folk was partly influenced by the Reformation, which religious movement strictly prohibited the clergy from using their priestly powers to intercede in the affairs of man. So then it says there was still an increased need for this stuff from the people, but the priests couldn't do it. So the cunning folk filled the vacuum. And as a result, the magical religious practices formerly the preserve of priests became secularized. And there you go. Cunning folk became the sole traders of magic for countering bewitchments, cursing thieves, locating lost treasure, curing sickness, divining the future, and providing supernatural protection, tasks the populace once expected priests to fulfill. And yeah, like their ecclesiastical brethren, secular professionals did not consider the magical art to be antithetical to their Christian faith. In other words, it was Bloomberg 700, but also by the help of God. Put plainly, they saw no disconnect between their occult practices and their Christian beliefs. And that's really important that it had that Christian, it was within a Christian framework. That's what it says here. So, and if you read The Cunning Man's Handbook by Jim Baker, I wish you would. That is such a great book. I thought the price tag was a little hefty at the time back when I was super poor and I bought it because it was like $50 or something. You know, now I think it's definitely the price of the book is the introduction is worth the price of the book. It's not a how-to guide. It's a what was it guide. And that's really important in this day and age of false and misinformation. Um, so I definitely recommend the Anathema Maranatha. And this is all about the history of like Christians uh, basically doing dark magic. It goes back to the beginning. I mean, you know, we just, it is what it is. But yes, it's a very heavy focus on the cunning folk, which of course became here in Pennsylvania the powwowers. Unfortunately, in Europe, the cunning folk have died out and it's been replaced by neo-pagans. Um, you know, but that's the problem all over the world. I mean, that just is what it is. But so the historical practice is pretty much dead. Luckily, the Braucher, you know, the Pennsylvania Dutch Braucherei is keeping that tradition alive here in the New World. I guess it's still technically the New World. It's only been like 400 years or something. Um, so anyway, one of my favorite things to talk about. I love talking about the Cunning Men, and I love you know, reading. I have as many books that are available on it. All the grimoires and such they use, even some of the books that uh, people have thought maybe they just couldn't get anything out of. You know, there's ways to get stuff out of them. So that didn't make any sense, and just scratch that from the record. But anyway, so there you go. That's my talk about the Cunning Men for today. Hope we're all having a great weekend. And that's it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below. And until next time, God bless you guys. Love you. And we'll talk again really soon.